So the 2025 NFL Draft is officially in the books. We now know every single player the Packers have drafted. And so I want to give my overall takeaways, my overall thoughts on what the Packers did for this team, looking at some of their needs coming in, the different holes they filled, breaking down this entire draft, and I will also give my draft grade as well in this video. And to start off, let's just say I did not see the draft going this way. I'll throw up the players here, but you can see to start off wide receiver, that was clearly shocking for us Packers fans who are not used to seeing round one picks being used on wide receivers. I was very excited to see that nonetheless. And then to also have a receiver in round three in Savion Williams from TCU. I mean, that was another shock to get two receivers in the first three rounds. And then the Packers go edge rusher, Barron Sorrell, round four, edge rusher, who can also play linebacker, Colin Oliver, round five, defensive tackle, Warren Brinson, round seven, cornerback, Micah Robinson, and then round seven, offensive lineman, John Williams, and of course, round one, wide receiver, Matthew Golden, and round two, offensive lineman, Anthony Belton. So just looking at these draft picks, I would have thought that it would have been something more like rounds 4 through 6 in the first few rounds, just from a positional perspective. I did predict the Packers to go cornerback round one. That did not happen. And we'll touch on cornerback a little bit later in this video when it comes to Jair and the fact that they did not draft a receiver till round 7. That is pretty interesting. But my overall thoughts about this draft, I love this draft. To look at the first few rounds there, the Packers have really set themselves up for the future offensively. And I think we saw a lot about, what Brian Gutekunst and the front office's thoughts were overall just heading into, or now that we've seen what they've done in free agency with the different players they picked up, and then now in the draft, we have a pretty good idea, I think, of what they thought they really needed to do to take this team up a notch, take this team to the next step where they can really compete in the playoffs, because we saw Jordan Love's first year starting. They go on a run. They beat the Cowboys by a lot. They go in, barely lose to San Francisco. And then unfortunately, going into year two, overall in the regular season, they were better. But then they lose in round one to the Philadelphia Eagles, who were a very good team. They won the Super Bowl. But the Packers only put up 10 points. And so to look at this offseason, the Packers go after Aaron Banks, guard. They pay him a lot of money. And then they also come in round two and sign or draft a offensive lineman in Anthony Belton, who is just massive, 6'6", close to somewhere around 330, something like that. And so clearly the Packers thought they needed to bolster this offensive line. And looking back to that game against the Eagles in the wild card round, it's not shocking to see this is the way the Packers went, even though I didn't expect them to prioritize offensive line as much as they did. When you look at that game, Elton Jenkins went down with an injury. He only played in 4 snaps. And then Travis Glover came in, played 23 snaps. Kadeem Telfort played 39 snaps. And I think we saw in that game the lack of depth the Packers had on the offensive line. And considering how good some of these teams' fronts are, like the Eagles, other teams as well in the NFC, Gutekunst came into the offseason and clearly prioritizing not only the starters, but also the depth as well. I think was very important, because when you just have one weak link on the offensive line, it can really mess everything up. And especially when you have a guy that you're paying $55 million per year standing behind that offensive line, it makes it that much more important. And so I really thought that this offseason the Packers would have prioritized defensive line more than they did, just because when you look at last year, they were 20th in pressure percentage when it came to their defensive line, according to NFL Pro. And they didn't really address it in a heavy way. They did here later in the draft, but they didn't really address it early. They didn't address it in free agency as well. And I think we see here that the Packers were more concerned about protecting Jordan Love and solidifying this offensive line for the future than making the pass rush that much better with new additions, at least, top 3 round talent there. And I think the big thing is, because Jordan Love is back there, he dealt with a lot of injuries last year, not necessarily because of the offensive line struggling. I think overall, the O-line was pretty good, especially when it came to pass blocking. But you never want to get to a point where you're nervous about the guys you have out there not only because, you don't want guys to take sacks, but you really need to do everything you can to protect your most expensive asset, which is Jordan Love. And so now looking ahead to the future, just looking at this Packers offensive line, next year Rasheed Walker is going to be a free agent, as well as Sean Rhyan. I assume Zach Tom will get paid a lot of money, and I think that's one reason they drafted O-lineman here early, because Belton's going to be on a cheap rookie deal for the next 4 years. So it allows you to pay someone else and, not have a weak link there on the offensive line. And so now, even if Rasheed Walker is gone after next year, you have Belton, who could be left tackle. You have Jordan Morgan, first rounder last year, who could be left tackle. He could also be guard. Belton could also be guard. The Packers were saying one of the, I think it was the VP of player personnel, I'm pretty sure, was saying Belton can play tackle. He can also play guard. And so this offensive line is solidified for the future. We don't exactly know where they're going to play, where Belton's going to play, where Jordan Morgan's going to play, if they're going to beat out Sean Rhyan or Rasheed Walker for 2025. But looking ahead, Jordan Love is going to be protected there for the next few years with these additions, with Aaron Banks in free agency, Anthony Belton in round 2. So I'm really excited about that, because you never want to see your offensive line, struggle. And then the focus of wide receiver was very interesting. I expected them to target a receiver at some point, maybe in the first few rounds. I didn't expect round 1, just because you have the Christian Watson ACL injury. He may not come back until November. You have Watson and Dobbs both going to be free agents after this year. And so I think one big thing here, maybe one reason the Packers targeted wide receiver heavily, is, do you want to be in a position where you have to pay Christian Watson and or Romeo Dobbs a lot of money? Because the wide receiver market has gone absolutely crazy, as has a lot of other positions because of the increase of the salary cap. But Jamar Chase is about $40 million per year. I was checking before this. The 20th wide receiver, which is Stephon Diggs, when it comes to money made per year, $21 million per year. So even if you paid Romeo Dobbs as the 20th best receiver in the NFL, you're paying him $21 million per year. And I was looking up to see how much about Matthew Golden will likely get paid. And there were some different estimates from Spo tracking over the cap, but it was between $15.87 million and $17.56 or 8 million. That's estimate over his 4-year deal. So around $4 million per year. So when you just sort of compare that, if you're going to pay Watson or if you're going to pay Dobbs, and let's say they were at about $21 million per year, could be more potentially. Compare that to Golden. You're going to be paying $4 million a year. I mean, that's just I think a pretty good investment, not only when it comes to Matthew Golden and his talent, but also, anyone in the first round, especially later on, you're getting pretty solid deals there, just from a rookie contract perspective. And so with the Packers drafting 2 receivers early on, they put themselves in a spot where they don't really have to pay Christian Watson or have to pay Dobbs. I still have a feeling they're going to pay, at this point, I would say Romeo Dobbs. We'll have to wait and see what happens this season. I just think with Christian Watson's injury history, with his ACL injury, I'm not sure they'll pay him or bring him back, especially with Matthew Golden coming in, 4.2940. He's someone that was, he was the best last year in college when it came to 20-plus yard receptions with 23. And so he's a guy who can not fill the role when it comes to Watson's size, but he does open things up deep for the Packers with Watson's injury. And that was something that was important coming into this offseason with the Watson injury, was to find someone who can open things up for the Packers down the field. And so I really like the addition of Matthew Golden. He has great hands. Brian Gutekunst brought up, Packers GM, his ability to beat man coverage, his ability to get open quickly, on third downs. And so he's going to help Jordan Love out a ton. And then to also add Savion Williams, round 3 from TCU. He's someone that's going to be really fun to watch. If you've turned on some of his highlights, you can see what he does with the ball in his hands. He's just an insane, yards after the catch guy. Insane. TCU used him a ton in the backfield, and a lot of people have compared him to Deebo Samuel, just in the kind of ways you can use him. And I assume Matt LaFleur is going to be pretty excited to try to, see different ways he can get him, whether that's, screens in the backfield. There's just so many different things you can do with him. And Brian Gutekunst sounds pretty confident as well in him as a receiver. I know I was reading a lot of draft profiles, and some people seem to be somewhat concerned from him as a traditional type receiver. But listening to Brian Gutekunst, he seemed to think he's a solid separator, solid route runner. And so Golden and Savion Williams, two different style guys. With Golden, being about 5'11", Williams being about 6'4", and I think close to 220. So the Packers get two solid receivers, and it's going to be pretty exciting to see how they're utilized. But to invest that heavily in offense in the first 3 rounds, I think that, in the NFL, when you pay a guy $55 million per year, you want to surround him with the best possible situation. And I didn't expect the Packers to do this draft. I thought they'd target defense a little bit early, but they decided to go heavy offense, and I'm not complaining whatsoever, because I think that this offense is going to be set up in a pretty exciting way heading into the future. The one thing I am slightly concerned about is the Packers' edge rusher room. As I mentioned earlier, they were pretty inconsistent when it came to just getting pressure overall, 20th last year in pressure rate, and they didn't draft an edge rusher or defensive tackle until round 4. And so that's slightly a concern for me. But I do like the guys they drafted later on. Barron Sorrell from Texas. I mean, it was cool seeing him there still at the draft, one of the last guys in the green room. I watched his interview. He seems like a solid just person overall, and he seems, super consistent. And I was actually texting with one of my friends who follows Texas super closely, and he thinks that, Sorrell's a super consistent guy, a guy that, the fans love. And so he's someone that I think is going to be able to potentially play a lot of snaps in year 1, just because I think there has been some inconsistency with these edge rushers. Lucas Van Ness has not yet lived up to his potential, being a early first round draft pick. Gutekunst has said he seems to hope that Van Ness can take that next step. There's still a question there in my mind. Will he? I hope he does, but there's still some uncertainty there. And so I think the Packers needed to invest in the edge rusher room, and they did there first off in round 4. And I think Sorrell is going to be a solid player. I'm just, when it comes to round 4, guys, it's hard to know. Obviously, the hit rate's going to be lower, but you can still find really solid players in round 4. Zach Tom, Romeo Doubs. JJ Enagbare hasn't been great, but he's played a lot of snaps for the Packers, I think he was a round 5 guy. So I hope Sorrell can come in and be impactful, and we'll sort of see how that goes. And then round 5 to go edge again, Colin Oliver, Oklahoma State. A little bit smaller, like 6'2", I think 240-ish. And I was watching one video interview from, I think it was the Packers, I think it was director of player personnel, I'm pretty sure, was talking about his tremendous special teams ability, Colin Oliver. And so that could be one of the areas the Packers want to use Oliver. But I know he dealt with some injuries this past year, but watching some of his highlights, he's insanely fast, insanely quick around the edge. And so I think to get 2 guys who can play edge rusher there around 4 and 5, your odds of finding someone who can come in and make an impact quickly do go up. So that's good to at least see them invest there after not going over, drafting a guy in the first 3 rounds. But I'm still slightly concerned about the edge rusher room because we'll sort of have to wait and see if it improves this year. But I'm not sold that it's going to. It may. I hope it does. And hopefully these guys can bring something here. And then round 6, defensive tackle, Warren Brinson. Losing TJ Slayton was a pretty big deal. He was one of the best when you look at ESPN run stop win rates. He goes to the Bengals. Warren Brinson isn't exactly the same kind of guy. I think Slayton was a lot bigger, just size-wise, like 330. I think Brinson's about 315. But he's someone who looked like he can be pretty solid against the run. So at least they add some more depth there. I think they needed to add defensive tackle depth, especially with Slayton gone, and they do that there. And then it's not till round 7 that the Packers decide to draft a cornerback in Micah Robinson from Tulane. And so when you look at the Jaire situation, I did also just see, important to note right before this video, let me pull up the tweet. Matt LaFleur mentioned something about Jaire. So this is tweeted from Matt Schneidman. He said, Matt LaFleur says Jaire Alexander participated in the team's virtual first week of voluntary off-season work. So that is interesting because that is voluntary. You would assume that maybe if Jaire was potentially or planning not to be with Green Bay, he wouldn't show up to a voluntary workout, but he shows up to a voluntary workout. And I've been saying that I thought it would be more likely that Jaire is gone. I just sort of had a feeling that, the fact that Gutekunst has been trying to trade him, I just sort of felt like the Packers and him would part ways, and if they didn't get a trade done, they would release him. But I also thought they would draft a corner early. And so the fact that they did not draft a corner early does make me think there's a higher chance in my mind compared to before the draft that Jaire stays in Green Bay. Because if the Packers would have gone a corner, let's say round 1, I would say I don't think Jaire is going to be here. Even round 2, maybe round 3. But to wait till round 7, I do think the chances of Jaire staying around have gone up in my mind. Not a ton, because the Packers do still have a lot of depth at corner. You have Carrington, Valentine, you have Keyshawn Nixon, Javon Bullard, Nate Robinson. So I don't think it's the end of the world if Jaire is gone. But at the same time, because it doesn't cost that much money to keep Jaire, I don't think it would be a bad idea to keep him around now, especially considering the fact that they didn't draft a corner until round 7. So that is interesting. As I said, I do think now the odds of Jaire staying around have gone up in my mind. I'm still not sold that he will, but I think it's more likely than it was in my mind, but I did think it was a pretty high chance he wouldn't be there. So interesting there. And then Micah Robinson was a corner there selected. Tulane, maybe more of a depth piece, being round 7, maybe a special teams guy, we'll see. And then round 7, the second pick, offensive lineman John Williams from Cincinnati, who played a lot of left tackle. So the Packers get some more depth on the offensive line. And so all in all, as I said, I love this draft, mainly because of what it does for the offense and Jordan Love. And I think to have that much competition in the wide receiver room is going to make everyone better and, sort of force all these guys who are already here, like Wicks, like Dobbs, like Jaden Reed, to really step up their game even more, because, when you have those young guys in there who are pretty high draft picks, especially Golden, and then Williams being a 3rd-round draft pick, there's going to be a lot of competition for these spots, and so that's going to be something I think will bring the best out of all of these guys, and then to have Love protected with a guy like Belton who could turn out to be a really solid player. You can never go wrong, drafting offensive linemen. So all in all, for my grade, I'm going to give the Packers an A-. I really love this draft. The one thing that I'm just still slightly concerned about is the edge rusher group. Around 4 and 5 guys, they could end up being really good. I really hope they are. But I do think as you get lower in the draft, your odds of hitting on a guy are lower. And so with the way they struggled last year, I haven't seen the Packers make a move where I'm like 100% sold. Things are going to be changing there. I hope they do. Hopefully some of these guys can progress forward. I do think Brenton Cox is really good. I think that they should play him a lot more. If Lucas Van Ness can really take a big step forward, that will drastically change things for the Packers. But that's the one area where, defensive line-wise, I thought they needed to invest at least in one of those guys early, and they didn't. So while I love the players they picked, that's one of my slight concerns. But clearly, in drafts, you can't, fill every hole and do everything you want to do. And so when you're really loading up offensively, that means you're going to have to wait later to get defensive players. So I fully get that. But that's sort of the reasoning I would give for an A-. But I really love this draft. I do love Gutekunst's decision to go after receivers. It's pretty exciting. Receivers are probably some of the more exciting players to draft. But those are my thoughts, my grade overall. Let me know yours in the comment section down below. I appreciate you guys watching all of these videos over the entire draft weekend. I think this was my 5th year making all these videos for the Packers draft, because I started this channel back in May of 2020, a little bit after Jordan Love got drafted. So I appreciate you guys watching, subscribing, all the new subscribers. I appreciate you guys for supporting the channel. But it's been lots of fun. I'll be out with more content throughout the offseason until the season comes back. And I'm excited for this next year. Hopefully the Packers can take another step forward, get farther in the playoffs. But I appreciate you guys watching as always, and I'll see you guys next time.